Hi, everybody. Since the last time I spoke with Pascal, there were a lot of questions that I had that I wanted to go deeper into, and many of you contacted me, letting me know that there were questions that you would like me to go deeper into as well if I ever had a chance to follow up with them. Well, guess what? We're going to follow up with them right now in a conversation that's going to start in a few moments. And this time around, instead of focusing more on the creative impact of artificial intelligence and how all of us who create content will be impacted, I'm going to shift the focus a bit to address some of the questions that we didn't get to before. And these all revolve around Pascal's extremely deep skills as someone who can take an idea and a vision and turn them into products that people love. We're going to talk about all the various things that go into it, all the go-to-market activities that we typically have to follow. It's going to be a really fun chat. So sit back and let's get started. All right, Pascal, great to catch up with you for round two. The first one was so much fun that there's just so much more that I want to ask, and then people have told me they would like me to ask you. So I figured let's just get you back on the call and do another round and trip around this whole fun conversations.
It is good to be back. Thanks for having me.
All right, all right. So, one of the things, previously when we chatted, we spent a lot of time talking about AI assistants and, that whole world and how it's going to change how creative people build and, create things. But there's another angle to you because there's only one side of what you do, though. There are other parts of you that are equally, fascinating. And that is your journey as an entrepreneur. You're someone who's worked at companies, but then you've started your own company and, and done all these things. I've always held this, assumption, it could be completely faulty here. I always felt that designers make really good CEOs or make really good early stage employees compared to the traditional disciplines you might think about, like product management or developers or so on. And so I kind of want to pick your brain on that, you having been through all of these things. What do you see as the thing that, first of all, am I correct in my assumption? And second, what do you think that makes designers more likely to be better at running companies, especially for products that people might enjoy wanting to use?
Oh, wow. That is a good question. I'm not confident if designers are all necessarily the best ones to run companies, but I do think that the perspective they bring is is pretty different to say like your classic engineer type or a business type. Um, because I think a great designer um, is a little more like an artist, and I think artists are really good at articulating the vision, not just by talking about it, but making artifacts that communicate what the thing is, or who it's for. And I think when a good artist or designer, which is really also someone that is a communicator, is able to put stuff into a form or artifacts that do communicate the vision, then they can kind of get people behind them and on board, right? And with just a little bit of work, even if they're not doing all the technical work underneath, they can create a picture of the thing or concept art of the thing. Then people can see that, okay, there's a real idea in their head. They're not talking about vague things. There's a way to thread the needle on, creating the product or the world that the thing lives in. And I think like part of design is also, I use design and art like pretty interchangeably, at least just in the way that I operate. Like I'm not really a pure designer. Like design is just like one thing that I do under maybe a larger umbrella of art. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a real art to communication and rallying people around that particular vision. And part of that happens in like, um, if I was to borrow a word from the book of Disney, like Imagineering, right? It's like imagination and kind of engineering at the same time, and like pulling things out from the idea space into reality. And it's not always practical. Sometimes it's just enough to give people like a sense of the flavor uh, of the thing, and they can put their hands on the electricity of the vision, I think.
Gotcha. So I think the storytelling ability that designers have a more natural inclination for gives them an edge, at least early on in some of these things. The other thing I was curious about is, maybe it's the wrong people I hang out with, a tough crowd of developers basically. But I always felt that developers typically, or even me as a product manager, typically focus on like, here's a cool problem. Let's see what we can do here. Whereas I feel like designers take a more holistic view and say, okay, maybe it's part of communicating and, communicating to other human beings. It's like, what's the human angle to this? Like, would someone really find this interesting? Or is it something that
Yeah.
we're just doing because it just happens to be, cool technology in all these areas? We just want to do something interesting here.
Yeah,
I put it this
honestly,
way. I
over
don't
the
hear this. I
years,
think the designer's going like, "Oh, it's a cool Photoshop brush here. I can't wait to build a company around it." But I've definitely seen cases where like, here's an API that someone created. I have no idea what it does. Let's just do something random with it, And I'm like, that's gonna have exactly the level of success based on the thought process you put into all of this.
yeah, honestly, over the years, I've found that the gap between when designers and engineers, if they really are two different types, some are, because some people only design, some people only engineer, has sort of smushed together, like culturally, where you do have a good chunk of people who are inside the more insulated bubbles. They work at a traditional software company, or maybe they live in a tech heavy city such as San Francisco, where I lived for a few years. Um, it's not only engineers that are guilty of it, designers too, who spend a lot of time inside software companies. And I say software companies because there are software companies that the end user are software people. And so you get this like funny thing where it's like, we make software for people who make software, for people who make software, for software, for software, for software, for software. And you start to lose track of, well, what type of person is using the thing. It's very easy to be inside the bubble and then forget that outside it, there's like normies who like have never heard of the word API before. Um, they don't know what like a Docker container is. They've never operated a terminal, and maybe the word AI is like just something that they've heard in science fiction before. Um, I used to believe like designers had a bit more of an edge or a swing, but after doing it for as long as I have and just seeing the two edges sort of diffuse into each other, I think they're both kind of in the same bucket, and it really depends on which area of industry you're in. Some people are just very inside the like what would you call it? Well, the bubble. And then there are some companies that are, a little more designed to serve the pop culture. And they're less concerned about like, well, this would be a cool button to throw in here. Or this API seems like it would be fun to try to come up with an idea for. It's like um, when you're in that bubble method of thinking, there's a lot of trying to create a problem for the thing, like invent a bunch of problems to justify the thing existing. Whereas when you're working with real flesh and blood, like messy people, you can just ask them, like, what problem are you dealing with? And they'll tell you. And I think the diff between those two things is pretty broad. So I don't know if that answers the question,
No,
but it's at
it
least,
does. It does.
yeah.
So, what do you think is the ideal makeup of a company at an early stage? For, let's say, it's a creative, endeavor. You're building something that you're passionate about, and you want to scale it up. What do you think is the ideal makeup?
Man, well, certainly as few people as possible, and certainly as many like multidisciplinary people as possible. I think um, people who can, hop between the different tracks of work is great because they can at least empathize and consider like what their other collaborators are going to need to be able to do, even if it's designed with a bit of engineering like understanding. Then they're existing in the real world. Then like engineers who understand like what's important to a designer and won't be annoyed if they're tapped on the shoulder to implement a detail, or artists who understand a little bit of both of those things. But I think all of that like kind of goes out the door if at the top there isn't good vision, right? I think like the leader, the CEO of the company needs to really be able to express like where everyone is heading, and ideally that's the only thing that they have to do. Like in the projects that I work on, like eventually I get to a point where I try to fire myself out of the project as quick as possible by hiring people that are way better at doing the stuff that I do, so I can go off and think about more of the future work. But early on, like I try to do as much of it as possible, and in recent months, like really roll the sleeves up on engineering myself. I think if you can understand the full stack, then then you know how to hire in people who can do the work effectively.
Yeah, no, and one of the things I always liked about all of your various projects and companies you start or you've been a part of is that you're extremely good at generating hype for the products that you ultimately build. Even in its very early stages, I'm like, yeah, I can't wait to try this out. Whereas I look at other products built by other people, I'm like, yeah, it's great. I have no interest in it. It's not because the products themselves are not good or not comparable. It's just that your way of getting the message out has been very unique. So, can you talk more about that? Like, what is the secrets that one needs to have to generate interest for an early stage product before it even is ready for prime time?
I think a good chunk of it is meme engineering, and funnily enough, there's this fella in the software scene who knocked two out of the park in a row recently. Nikita Beer. I don't know if you've seen his work around. He he made an app called Gas, and then the one before that was I'm
I
forgetting
think
the
it's
name of it.
Nikita, right?
Yeah, Nikita Beer.
Yeah,
Yeah, he sold the company. I think it was called TBH. He sold that to Facebook.
correct.
Had got locked up in a non-compete. He wasn't allowed to like work on another product within the space. And then as soon as that 4 years elapsed, he just made the app again and sold it to Discord. But at the heart of that, I mean, he was very hardcore in growth. Like I don't know if the products were really designed to have longevity, um, which is a bit different to the way that I try to approach things. But there was a lot of engineering on it. Like I'd say more of the app was about engineering than it like being, I think maybe on the inside, genius as a product itself. Um, and in that, it's like yeah, it's like meme engineering. How do you create an idea that will replicate what's gonna like have the largest sort of network effects? Can you create something that sort of pops off as an atom bomb? For me, I like products as like an artistic medium, almost in the same way that like a musician likes to release singles, like music, and then you got to think about how to market it. And I'm a big fan of the art of the stunt. Like, what can you do to bind it into pop culture? There was an app that I was working on a few companies ago where I I sort of put a bunch of like cult or religious themes around it, but like lighthearted ones.
Yep.
And the mascot of the company was like this all seeing eye,
I remember
and
that. Yeah.
yeah, and it was the idea was like it's your personal god who like creates all these beautiful realms for you to hang out in with your friends, and the feeling was or the idea was if I'm forming a real cult, I got to have celebrities to endorse it, just like real cults do. And so I managed to trick Lindsay Lohan into um, recording a prayer video to this god, and then we put it online as like sort of an ad, but like not really. We didn't really like mention anything about what the ad was. It was just weird enough, right? Whether it was attached to an app or not, just in standalone as like an interesting, strange thing to get people talking. That then people were like, "What the frick is this?" And they went out of their way to go find like who was behind this. We actually spun up a shell company and pretended it was a church, so people would like assume that there was like some greater like beautiful mind story behind it, but really it was just get people to come into the app. But by the time they're in it, they're already primed to play within the meme space. They were
Yeah.
coming in, they were like, "Oh, great, God, I'm here to like download the app. Like, how do I get blessed?" They would they'd almost like uh, succumb to or agreed to play the game. And I think when you can make like a meme or a game that other people can get in on, they're like more down to spread it as well because that's a fun place space for them to bring their friends into without them having to create the thing from the beginning. So I try to make as many things like that where like you could imagine the story of someone else showing it or the story of you showing it to a friend would be just a fun like uplifting thing, and that in a way can just be sort of like a little cultural atom bomb type effect, a chain reaction.
Yeah. So, did you get Lindsay Lohan to the Cameo app, or did you have some other back channel that you're able to get her endorsement
Oh,
on?
that I exploited Cameo very early on before they like really stopped you from you know using it for corporate types of activities.
Ah,
And then very
gotcha.
quickly they clamped down on it. But she didn't know that she was recording like an ad for a fake cult. I told her that she was helping us with a video for a friend's stinky little dog named Charlie, and I was able to splice little bits out of the video and put it into a continuous enough seeming take that people were like, "What the heck?" And she was
Yeah.
just starting to come back into the scene after taking a bunch of time off. So there's a timing thing with some of those memes too, right? It's like, well, who's the perfect celebrity, or what's the perfect like topic to carry the thing at the moment? Um, yeah,
Well, hey,
I
nice thing is it is random, and creative, so it all worked out. I mean, it's not your first time, I think, using celebrities as well. Because I remember using the Keezy app, and I remember seeing Reggie
yes,
Watts like frequently in some, which was very appropriate. 'Cause, I think Keezy was a drum music beats kind of an app, and then having a musician who is very talented and likely a user of something like that made a lot of sense.
yeah. Reggie was incredible to help us with distribution, and he's an old friend of like us and the company. We described him as our company shaman, and as soon as we had the app together, um, there was a funny sequence of events that happened where we were starting to get some lift on the thing. It was a strange app to be working on amongst the current landscape of apps at the time, which were social type apps like Facebook and Tumblr and Flickr and all those like Web 2.0 kind of networks were in vogue. And we were just making a thing for making music. It was pretty pure, very simple. But it's like one South by Southwest, AT&T had seen this thing. They were like, "Holy crap! Like this is fresh." Apple was like starting to feature us in the Apple stores. The app was installed in every app around every Apple store around the country, and so we were starting to get this cool lift. And then AT&T asked us, "Would you come do like an installation at South by Southwest? We have like 100K or 200K or whatever, like some pretty crazy amount of money to like do a physical installation." And so in about a week, we worked with another hardware company in New York, scrambled them together, and we built a giant version of Keezy. And there was this funny threading the needle moment where we were like, well, how are we gonna attract people to come to this thing? AT&T really wanted someone to demonstrate how to use Keezy, and Reggie had already been playing around with the app a little bit, and so they kind of knew that he was within our circle a little bit. We were having some chats back and forth, creative brainstorms, and on that same trip in Austin, we did two things. One was I directed a live action commercial featuring Reggie to promote the app because he's perfect, right? He can make any sound come out of his body. And then we had him do a live performance where he stomped around on the giant Keezy, and he had a microphone that would beam the audio under his feet. And he was just like the perfect spirit, the perfect like distribution for this idea. And it almost felt like, we take bits of feedback from him about like what is working or what needs a little polish or what would make it great for you. And because some of Reggie's tastes started to make its way into the app, including some samples and stuff from him, some of his artistic spirit also kind of made its way through it. And so that helped push it forward, right? It was just like supernaturally aligned. It didn't feel like, Michael Phelps doing a soy milk commercial. That one always weirds me out. I don't know if they still sell at the grocery stores, but for a while they had Michael Phelps soy milk. And all I could think in the back of my head was, oh God, they have milked Michael Phelps. It's a strange brand alignment. But, Reggie with music just made sense.
Yeah, no, Reggie and like I still remember that for because it just the stars aligned so well on that one. Great product, great marketing, and the right person to be right up there talking about it.
Yeah, that was truly a special one to do. And I definitely keep that in the back of the head. I mean, definitely fortunate to have some connects to some heavy hitters. Not everyone has access to, excellent talent like that. But, I think there's creative ways around it. There's ways to kind of hack the
I mean,
simulation.
I promise not to get too deep into AI again this time around, but there are enough things now where you can pretty much have any movie characters say whatever you want them to say, and the facial movements and the mouth movements and so on is on point with the words that are coming out of their mouth. And of course, also sounds like them as well.
Yeah, I mean that starts to get in some dicey territory too, because you go after someone's likeness. We're about to enter a pretty strange era as far as access to IP goes. If anyone can just make
Yeah, you might have
anything.
seen those, right? Where like I think someone tries to make Tom Cruise do like normal kind of activities by using superimposing his face and body on himself, basically, and it almost looks believable. Like you cannot really tell the difference between like is this real Tom Cruise or fake Tom Cruise or Tropic Thunder Tom Cruise, for all we know.
Yeah, they there was a very popular TikTok account, I think, which was
It
deep
was,
faking
yes.
Tom Cruise. And then more famously, I believe there was a recent Anthony Bourdain documentary where they trained a voice model on his voice and then used AI Anthony Bourdain to narrate the documentary,
Wow,
which
that
is
is
wild.
trippy.
Yeah. And last night I heard a story. I can't say who the actor is, but um, there was a famous voice actor who had passed away recently, who was involved in the, let's say, Disney family. And one of my friends, who's a fantastic voice actor, has been assisting in training and articulating of an AI model to like extend the legacy of this character and his work. So, times are changing as far as the simulation of these characters and personalities go to almost being eternal. Just
Yeah.
strange
No.
world we're in, man.
So not to go deep into that territory one more time, but getting back to apps and so on. One of my favorite apps that you had worked on was the note taking app. The one that allows you to take notes. Visual, had like a I'm forgetting the name of it at this point, but it's
Was
basically
it
a note
Thing
taking app.
List?
Thing list, exactly. Like that was
Oh
probably my
man.
favorite, and I used it way, way, way longer than I felt like your metrics even estimated people to use. It wasn't until like cloud syncing was one of the things I couldn't live without. I was like, okay, I need to do something different. But the iconography, the colors, the spacing, all of these things goes back to my earlier point about like having a designer being a core part of this from an early on stage because there are a billion note taking apps, and then every day a
Yeah.
billion note taking apps come back, but for me, ThingList was like the one I always felt as a gold standard and like my favorite app that I used because I take notes
Oh
all
man.
the time.
I almost forgot about Thing List. That is a vintage one at this point, and that was fun to work on. Sometimes taking the weirdo designer animated brain and applying it to slightly more vanilla problems can unlock some new approaches to making a thing, right? Like I think at the time, like there were a bunch of people like doing to-do list apps, but we wanted to do something with a bit more flavor. And yeah, it was nice to make a pretty polished thing. I mean, it I think it was like one of the few properties we actually like sold, and for not that much money. I think it still exists. I think there's another company that kind of like took over ThingList, and they maintain it a little bit. I don't know if they ever did cloud sync or anything, um, but yeah, I spend a lot of time these days inside game engines and um, still doing animation kind of heavy stuff in 3D things, but and those can be like really challenging spaces to be in because you just the simulation space you have to hold in your mind is a lot. You just kind of put in a different mode, right? And but it's all at the end of the day, it's all computers, right? It's all code. It's all the same kind of
Yes.
stuff underneath, but it's just a very different way to articulate it. And it is fun, honestly, to like come back to the slightly more quote unquote vanilla type problems and be like, well, what if we push it through this lens of the higher order like thinking? Can you make like some of these more typically mundane experiences um, like have a personality or flavor? And I think those things having personality and flavor humanize them and ends up making them more of a humane experience instead of us having to become more computer-like and turn ourselves into robots to be able to interact with computers. I think when software becomes more like a being which has a personality, it's a lot more natural to relate to.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think there was a book called, I think it was called Society of Mind, that I think it was
Mm.
by I think Marvin Minsky, that going into detail exactly on this. Is that at the end of the day, we've been trying to make humans behave more like computers and like how we think and program and speak their language. What if we did the other way around? What if it was the other way around, where we spoke a common language and we trained all the various systems to understand it, and the common language being something that humans are more
Oh, sure.
readily friendly about.
Yeah, I mean, I think even today, code is it's kind of like learning magic spells. Even if you know how to engineer, to the normal person, it's still such a difficult interface and mental plane to have to put yourself in.
Yeah, because
Um,
you're always told to, like, you want to solve problems in the domain you're trying to operate in. Which means a visual task is best done visually. Which is why you have so many direct manipulation and all these
right.
things and tools to make it not like I'm drawing a rectangle. I'm going to draw a rectangle using a tool that is optimized for drawing rectangles. Whereas coding is still very much a case where if you're drawing a rectangle, you're writing text and not even like logical text. It's like bizarre SVG syntax, or or maybe even like direct imperative commands on like canvas, where like literally moving coordinates from one point to another. And I think there's a lot to be done here, even ignoring like low code, no code tools that try to abstract away details. But all these abstractions come with limits, whereas you can't do the things you might want to do because you're blocked by the tool's ability to represent a visual concept into whatever backend language it needs to be ultimately represented in.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's so much to have to wrap your head around, I think, to be able to move the medium of software around in an effective way. It's like
Yeah.
I feel like every day is that, mind expansion meme of like the galaxy
Yeah,
brain.
exactly. Exactly. So getting back to one more point, I'm curious. I'm gonna put you on a spot here. So here are
Okay.
two situations. I'm curious to get your take on what would be the more successful product at the end of it. Mediocre product, great distribution. That is product A. Product B, great product, mediocre distribution. What do you think has a greater chance of success?
Well, I think to really answer that question, it comes down to what is the measure of success. If we're talking about making the cheddar cheese, the first one of mediocre product, greater distribution, for sure. I mean, there's so many things in the world, if we just forget software products, just on earth, that crack the distribution piece. That's why the world is full of a lot of crap too.
Yeah.
And then a lot of like the really excellent things, just if that never cracked distribution, you could consider them a commercial failure, but maybe artistic success. One of the key examples, I push a lot of things through the Disney lens lately because I've just been doing a really deep dive on like the life of him, and he's very
Yeah.
upstream of a lot of the stuff that I do. Fantasia was one of his like big pure artistic endeavors, and um, what was the name of the Leopold Stokowski was the name of the musical collaborator, I believe. And he wanted together, Walt really wanted to do an uncompromised, like artistic film, forgetting what would be. Uh, he wasn't leaning into what's going to hit it the biggest in the box office, right? It was like what's going to be the purest expression of the idea. Um, Fantasia, now everyone knows about it, and it did eventually make Disney money. But when the thing came out, I mean, there's interviews of him talking about it: commercial failure, artistic success, right? And I guess it comes down to what is important. And at the time, if we really are measuring Disney as an artist, um, wildly successful with Fantasia, because I think great artists eventually have to work out how to reinvent themselves after a while. It's very easy to get stuck in your patterns, and then you kind of lose your unique perspective because the rest of the world almost kind of catches up. And so Fantasia was one of those reinvention moments for him where he had to really turn a lot of his thinking inside out to get that film out, and it certainly inspired a lot of future work that happened at the studio. But did it make the studio like a good amount of money? No, it like lost a lot of money, like, and so it didn't have the right distribution, um, and it also just it it was too ahead of its time. There's a timing thing on things too, I think.
Yes.
There's a right time for ideas to land, and yeah, I think it just really comes down to what's important. I think that he wouldn't have like done. I sense he wouldn't have like done Fantasia another way. You know, that's like one of those notches in the belt you want to keep. Like the stuff you learn getting to work on a project like that uncompromised is invaluable, even though it costs millions of dollars.
Yeah, and I think that's something I always hear about a lot of creatives who are creating shows for Netflix, specifically saying like, yeah, Netflix gives them more freedom to do what they want to do, which may or may not work out. I don't know how it works out now, given that they're being more constrained in like funding and quality. But at least like a few years ago, it was typically the case where like if you have an idea that is unproven but you're passionate about it, there's a platform that will be willing to support it, and it was almost Netflix.
Right. Have you seen Midnight Gospel? Have you heard of it?
I I have not. Let's see if I heard of it. I'm a visual person, so I might have seen the actual, artwork on it.
So
And
Midnight
oh yeah,
Gospel is
I've seen the trailer. I've seen the cover art for it. Yes, I've not seen it though.
so the fellow behind it is a man of the name Pendleton Wood, and his most famous uh, creation is Adventure Time, which I'm sure you've heard of that show,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it did very well for Cartoon Network. It's like I think one of the most popular properties at the time, and it did quite a number of seasons. Um, and I don't know the full backstory of how the Netflix deal happened, but just like my I'd say like my analysis as an artist and looking at how this thing got produced, it was clear that there was sort of like, well, Pendleton, you freaking crushed it on Adventure Time. Come to Netflix and do whatever the hell you want. And you watch the thing, and it is so freaking bizarro and weird. Like it features this kid who puts his head in this like weird like honestly like space vagina looking thing. Like it represents some like reproductive organ, and he puts his head in it, and it's this like futuristic VR simulator, and it's
Yeah,
very psychedelic. And he beams into the bodies of these characters, and they go on this super lucid, fluid, trippy adventure every time he puts his head inside the machine. And the amount of detail, you can just tell that they were just having fun with it and not worrying about, well, we need to be economic, or this shot like doesn't make sense here, or this would be expensive. There's just a sense of, wow, they just let him play and create whatever he wants. I mean, I'm sure it's probably like have X million dollars and just go to town and just turn it in whenever the thing's complete. I would guess that it was probably something like that. But you have this feeling of, well, this is not a true commercial product. While Netflix, is distributing it, I don't think he was trying to make something that would punch in the same class as Adventure Time did. But anyway, I
yeah.
highly recommend checking out Midnight Gospel, because you watch it and you're like, okay, there's no way if this was put in front of a contemporary, like modern audience, just on one of the main channels or Cartoon Network, people would get it. They'd be like, this is from another planet. But I do think that Midnight Gospel in maybe 10 years or 20 years, when I think the world itself becomes more psychedelic, with psychedelia making its way into the population, like psychedelic mushrooms and all the other things that are becoming legalized. I
Yep.
think like there'll probably be a bit more of a cultural awakening, and then they'll be ready to receive an idea like that, and they'll just be like that. It'd almost be like a classic. They'd be like, oh yeah, of course. These ideas we think about already. But artists are often out ahead of the rest of the pack. It's very sensitive types of people, and so they often get ideas beamed into their head before everyone else. And I think another part of the job is like working out when to. They get to choose when to release it amongst the, the rest of the folks who are both artists and non-artists.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think about the point you made earlier about timing is such a core part of, it impacts anything that we typically do, but even in art specifically, because, I forget, I read a lot of articles and books and so on. It's hard for me to keep track of what I read and when. There's a great article I was reading a short while ago where it talked about if you took like an automotive design from today, cutting edge and all of these things, and you took it back, like I said, 20, 30 years, they'd have been like, this is garbage. This is absolutely awful. We're going to do whatever we think the future, what 2022 might look like, and look very
Right.
different. Even though if you look at it today, we're like, wait, that looks like something from the Jetsons. It's really terrible. And there's something that came out of it, which is really like sometimes ideas are so far ahead that even if it is good, the timing of when it's introduced has to play a big role because a great idea introduced way too early could not only sabotage that idea from that moment, it could potentially sour that idea from ever becoming a reality. And then an idea that came out of it was Clippy, the old Microsoft Office,
Oh yeah,
character,
yeah,
where, it gave you text-based assistance on contextually on what you were doing at the time. Execution, there's a lot to be desired, but that pretty much stopped any kind of discussion on that space for so long until the
yeah,
people of the era probably don't remember it anymore. Like, you and I are probably the only people right now on this planet who are talking about it and remember it, at this very moment. Whereas for many other things, it's still part of the zeitgeist. And so that always struck with me, when I have like an interesting idea and I'm like, okay, people don't like this idea now. Is it because my presentation of the idea was bad? Or the idea is just too far ahead of its time?
yeah. I think it can often read as culture shock to the people who are not quite ready for it yet. If you imagine like a weird futuristic flying car coming in, just being dropped in right now, it's just like too much for some people to wrap their heads around, right? Because that means it's challenging their assumptions, their base assumptions on so many other things. And I think some people, or most people, can only tolerate so many of their core beliefs or principles challenged at a given time, right?
Yeah, I do the Cybertruck as an example of this. When it was first
Yeah.
introduced, some people were like, this is hideous, absolutely awful. Some people were like, it's the greatest
Right.
thing ever. And most of the people probably played the Halo video games where it reminded them of the Warthog. They're like, oh, this is like a Warthog. I gotta have it right now. But then
Yeah.
2 years later, now everyone's like, yeah, that totally makes sense. And then we see like other competing car companies doing equally blocky kind of looking things. It's just like, yeah, it's just part of the norm. And no one remembers at that time how much backlash and so on that came out of this whole thing. But also part of me is like, does it really matter? The product is compelling and the vision of it is, I don't think it's actually out. So I don't think anyone's actually outside of a handful of people have used it, but the vision was so compelling that it was able to overcome so much of the negativity and the headwinds it faced at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this underlying like mechanic that is still built into our like monkey brains, which is for better or worse, because it's probably a defense mechanism. The fear of new things, right? And then you can see alien. It's like something from an outer tribe. It's like going to challenge everything. You want to throw stones at it or smash it into a million pieces.
Yeah,
And
and it
like,
definitely didn't hurt
as
that. It definitely doesn't hurt that Elon also happens to be like doing SpaceX and so on. So like, wait, so your mind is like on two ends here. It's like, wait, it has a vision and the team around it to take
right,
rockets up and land the rocket back down again, and yet he gives us this. There's something wrong with
right,
me, right? I'm the one who's not able to see this because why would someone like that, lead us in the wrong path, the wrong design? So there's a
yeah,
cult of personality angle that plays a large role in this as well. Whereas it was one thing if like some random person came with a Cybertruck, versus here's the person behind SpaceX and Tesla in general, and other endeavors like the flamethrower, basically doing this. So I think those are all like goes back to the early stages of like building hype and all the various factors that kind of go into it.
yeah. I mean, I think he definitely is a visionary. As like, I mean, it is crazy to look at obviously the efforts he's made sending shit to space, setting up infrastructure, and then being a huge troll on Twitter. And then
Yeah,
you have to somehow hold all of that in your head and make a like binary evaluation of Rocket Man good or Rocket Man bad. It's just it's way more complex than that. And
yeah,
you've got like a very complex person who has a godly amount of uh, resources um, twiddling his finger in, our simulations. We had stuff to happen, but yeah, man, it's 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 been a real roller coaster to watch.
Yeah, yeah. So, one thing, we're getting close to like the end of our time here. I want to, ask one question. What does success mean for you? You've done a lot of really interesting things in my 20 years that I've known you, and they've all been very, very different in some cases. There's a common theme of that, you have an idea that you want to get out to the world. But beyond that, what motivates you? What are your plan? What are your, 10 years from now? What does success for you look like?
I think there's two things. One is I would hope I can just continue doing what I get to do every day. A lot of it is play, and a lot of it is to really have the privilege of being an artist. Ideally, I'm just doing as much of that as possible and no other distractions. But the second is it'd be great to really build something that lasts. And I don't know exactly what the form of that is. Um, some of it might be like the feeling of legacy. For some reason people have kids and whatnot, and they want to continue on their lineage. But um, I just think in a world of technology and software, we've just normalized working on things that are incredibly ephemeral. And um, the idea of making something or creating something that lasts longer than a few years to me is such an exotic or out there idea if we just consider where culture is today. The attention spans are so short. Um, but working on something that could really span a lifetime or a decent chunk of a lifetime is really, really appealing to me because you get people to have a different relationship to the thing. It's less about the quick little hits and the dopamine spikes and more like this is a thing that I hold with me or carry in my life or an experience or an idea. It'd be cool to create a thing that is that meaningful sometime, but not in a rush to do it. I think it'll happen naturally. But yeah, that would be it. Build something that lasts and continue getting to just create art all the time.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer there.
Thanks, man.